So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening again. Okay, some of you just joined us. Okay, so today's talk is on dealing with anxiety. I think it's safe to say we all deal with anxiety to a greater or lesser extent, um, including myself. I also deal with anxiety. And today I'm going to introduce how to deal with anxiety, particularly according to the Chan Buddhist tradition. When we say Chan Buddhist tradition, it actually includes the whole of the Buddhist tradition. The Chan school makes use of the whole of the Buddhist teachings. However, the method that's applied is particular, it's unique. And I'll introduce a bit more about the method later on. But to start, anxiety is everywhere, so to speak. Anxiety is everywhere in all of us. Some of us live in big cities. I live here in New York City. I'm not sure if there are any other New Yorkers out there. Yes, I think so. Some folks live in very crowded cities. Some folks live in cities that are less crowded, but a city nonetheless where there's a lot of competition. People are competing for things in the city. People are competing for space, competing for places to live, competing for work, competing to travel. Big cities, just to get on a train, sometimes you have to fight your way onto a train. So that just getting places can be anxiety provoking because we're not sure if we can get there on time. There's also competition for playtime or leisure time. In the city here in New York, many of you folks know we have Central Park, which is a beautiful, big park. Um, but it's interesting that sometimes when we go to the park, you have to actually look for a space. You have to try to find a space that's, you know, not only that you can sit on comfortably, but that's not crowded with people, unless you want to join a crowd of people, that is. So it's competing for leisure. And we all know that during this pandemic, there's even more competition and even more stress with the economic situation, with our career situations, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. Even though things seem to be opening up, things seem to be uh, getting more and more back to somewhat of what we used to call normal. So this pandemic life brings a lot of stress and anxiety. I don't know if there's any place in the world though that's free from anxiety. Maybe some folks live in the countryside. Some folks may live in a very rural area with a very simple life, few people, not so much competition. However, even in the countryside, aren't there anxieties of if you're very far away from things? Sometimes there may be an anxiety of making sure you have enough food, especially in wintertime. If you don't have enough food, there's a big snowstorm and you're miles and miles away from the next store. Doesn't that bring about some anxiety? Or if you're alone in a rural area, maybe you're concerned about your safety. That could be potentially anxiety provoking. What about just the fact that we have our bodies and our health to deal with? Is anybody free from illness? I don't know if there's anybody that's free from physical illness, any kind of ailment. So our body can be a source of anxiety. We don't know if we're going to be able to maintain our health, or if we have some kind of ailment. We don't know what's going to happen. Will it get worse? Will we be able to afford a treatment for our body? Even if we're in good health, we're not concerned about that. Maybe we're anxious about our wealth or our possessions. Maybe we're concerned about gaining or losing something. I have a friend who happens to do a lot of stock market work or trading. Excuse me. So it seems like every day I hear another story of how the stocks are going up or they're going down. They're going way up or they're going way down. So they talk about being anxious because they're not sure if the stock they just bought is going to go up, which would mean a nice big gain, or if it's going to go down and they end up losing everything they just put into it. There's a constant anxiety about the gain and loss of wealth. And of course, what about relationships? I think most, if not all of us, have some kind of relationships with family, with life partners, friends. And relationships can be a source of anxiety too, because maybe we don't know if we're going to lose someone. Be anxious of losing someone due to their health or losing someone due to maybe the relationship just not working out. So it's safe to say that we all face it. According to the Buddha's discourses, I haven't seen often the word anxiety used. I think it's occasionally used in the Buddhist sutras or discourses, but it's not used as a frequently occurring technical term. However, we often see the term restlessness in the Buddhist talks. Restlessness. Part of there's one teaching on the five hindrances to meditative stability. Five hindrances, or the wu gai. Restlessness is one of them. It's actually restlessness and remorse. And the Chinese, I think, is 调会, 调举 or 调会, which just means the mind is very agitated, restless, not at ease. And it may be due to remorse about the past, it may be due to an anxiety about the future, but it's an overall restless state of mind. We don't feel at ease. I think that corresponds somewhat to how we use the word anxiety today. In the Buddha's talks, he also used just the term fear and dread. Fear and dread with regard to our life, the reality of life and death, the comings and goings of our own life, others, and the comings and goings of everything in our environment. So, this fear, it's a fear, an underlying fear that we all experience. So, if we wanted to define anxiety, we could try defining it now. Anxiety, we could say it's a, a state of body and mind that's unsettled and agitated due to preoccupation with an uncertain future. It's a very long definition. Agitation of mind due to worry and preoccupation with uncertainty. So when we're anxious, we're anxious about something, right? We need to have an object to be anxious about. Some people have a very specific object. They may be anxious about their health. Others maybe they don't have a specific object. They just feel kind of anxious and disturbed almost all the time. I don't know if some of you have experienced that. I've actually experienced that when I was in my 20s, just kind of this seemingly constant feeling of anxiety and dis-ease. But it wasn't anxiety about something in particular. I was anxious about everything. I was anxious about driving. I was anxious about talking to people. I was anxious about looking for work. I remember being anxious about cooking, anxious about every big and little thing. So there's still an object there. You could say there was something I was anxious about, but it was just shifting and changing all the time. And I had this underlying current of dis-ease, of agitation. So, when we experience anxiety, what are the symptoms, so to speak? Now, the Buddha didn't talk about symptoms of anxiety, and often didn't, have a scientific or technical way to talk about the symptomology of how we suffer from anxiety. Um, but there are some common experiences, and modern psychology um, does this. It creates a clear um, presentation of symptoms, as well as categorizes anxiety. I'd like to share a little bit of that with you all today as well. I think the Buddha's teachings, as well as the categorization of suffering, categorization of mental illness and mental health of modern psychology, can be quite useful together. Because if we can recognize some symptoms, we know better what methods to use to help ourselves. So, for example, there's some symptoms that people may experience, which is one, just having a very scattered state of mind, thinking about all sorts of things, having a racing mind. Usually, that's accompanied with muscle tension, physical tension, and maybe accompanied by tremors, even shakes, shaking in the body. Some people may have unpleasant feelings in the stomach or the gut or the chest, often oftentimes lower the gut area. Some people just experience this overall irritability, being anxious and agitated so much that they feel irritable when somebody approaches them, or when they have to deal with things. They just feel upset easily. And due to that, a person may have poor sleep. It's hard to sleep when we're agitated. Or some people wake up in the middle of the night. They can fall asleep, but they may wake up in the middle of the night and feel very alert and even feel agitated and wake up with a racing heartbeat, even sweating. Some people may even have anxiety to the point where their body feels numb. The fingers or the feet or certain parts of the body may feel this numbness. Rapid breathing is another one, kind of as if, you know, as if um, there's a threat of rapid breathing. And it would be, when it becomes more serious, a person could have kind of uncontrolled bowel movements or vomiting and even just complete confusion, even to the point of a losing sense of your body altogether, feeling that you're out of your body, and then eventually even losing consciousness. Um, People can be anxious to the point of losing consciousness altogether. So, if you have experienced any of these symptoms or quite a few of these symptoms, that could be a sign that you're suffering from anxiety and may not know it, or just may not have noticed that um, it could be getting serious. But it's nothing to be afraid of, because actually anxiety, if we look at the number of people going to seek for professional help, let's say from a counselor or a therapist, the most common ailment is anxiety. And I did a statistic check. I was curious how many people went for professional help due to anxiety. And a couple years ago, it was something like 280 million people. And there's likely many, likely many more people who struggle with anxiety, but they just don't seek for help. So that number could be doubled. Who knows? It could be a billion people struggle with anxiety, but only a percentage seek for help. And again, in the Buddha's teachings, there's no categorization of kinds of anxiety, but within modern psychology, we've identified that certain people have certain forms of anxiety. So, for example, the one I just mentioned before of general anxiety, that's when a person just doesn't have one specific thing they're anxious about, but they may have many things or everything that they feel anxious about. There's other kinds of anxiety which are specific to social situations. Some people feel particularly anxious when they have to go socialize with others or when they have to give like a public presentation or talk. That can be a very um, paralyzing kind of social related anxiety. But there's also anxiety related to separating from people. Some people feel that when they separate from their parents, that's a very um, traumatic or very difficult thing to deal with. This could be with young children, babies, or this could be with even older people or adults. I spoke with a woman last night actually who said she feels a bit of anxiety because she knows her mother is not going to be around forever. But when her mother's not there, that's a very big loss of stability in her life. So there's a separation anxiety. And then there's also anxieties related to specific objects, whether those are living beings. Um, Maybe you've heard of anxiety or phobia towards spiders or certain animals. Some people have a phobia towards dogs. Um, or it could be inanimate, could be inanimate objects. Some people have a phobia or anxiety related to, for example, sharp objects, weapons, um, things like that, or even needles. I don't know how many folks have gone for the vaccination. For some people, it's like nothing. They just go, they get jabbed, so to speak, and it's over. For other people, it's a very difficult situation because they have a fear of needles. And the list goes on. Phobias and anxieties sometimes have specific objects. This is including height, including spaces, all of that. Then the next question is, why do we experience anxiety? These are all the different kind of forms and symptoms, but why do we experience anxiety? The Buddha once said in a discourse from I don't remember the name of the discourse, but it's from the middle length discourses. He said, fear or anxiety is due to foolishness, or fear, anxiety is due to ignorance. And that's not meant to insult anyone. It's not an insulting statement. But it means that the reason we experience anxiety is because we have this ignorance. In Chinese, it's 无明 or 愚痴, which means a lack of clarity or a lack of understanding. We can also call it a lack of awareness. We have an ignorance about ourselves, about the object we are anxious about. We have ignorance about the world. But what does that mean specifically? What does it really mean to be ignorant? So commonly, we use the word ignorance like this person was ignorant of the fact that um, they could apply for something and receive some public benefit. They just didn't know. It's a lack of knowing. In this context, though, ignorance refers to a lack of deep understanding, a lack of deep knowing about the reality of ourself and the world. And to be more specific, the Buddha would say that ignorance is when we see permanence in things that are impermanent. We mistake impermanent things for being permanent. That's one aspect of ignorance. So that's kind of the ignorance of change. In the context of time, that's the ignorance of change. We perceive things to be permanent when they're always changing. From another angle, from the angle of space, we perceive things to have a self that actually don't have a self. What does a self mean? A self just means something that's totally independent. So, in terms of spatial relationships, we have this impression, we have this perception that things are independent when they're actually dependent. So, for example, we often view ourselves as being totally independent when actually we're connected with other people in an infinite number of relationships. Yet we have this feeling and this sense that we're totally separate. We're just, I'm just me. All of you guys, all of you people, you're you, and you're all individual yous, all by yourself. And I'm me all by myself. We have this perception of self when there's no possibility to be totally independent. So in terms of time, we don't see change. In terms of space, we don't see the relationships, the deep connection that we have with everything. And this brings about a lot of suffering. We could say this is the source of suffering. This is what brings about our anxiety. And this is really the core of the Buddha's teachings, trying to point to the source of our problems and anxiety. And you don't have to believe this just based on what I said, but just reflect on it for a moment. Do you, with regards to your anxieties, do you see something as permanent? Is that object of your anxiety, does it seem permanent and that you can actually possess it and keep it from changing? Do you think that object that you're anxious about is all by itself, just itself? So we can give an example, just in terms of anxiety. Maybe some of us are facing anxiety about relationships. Maybe there's a person in our life, in your lives, that you're afraid of losing. And that brings about a lot of anxiety. Maybe you feel anxious all the time, just thinking and wondering, will this person leave? Will this person be separated from you? In the moment of anxiety, what's happening in our minds? What are we doing with our mind? The person may not even be near us in our room, in our space, but the person is in our mind. We have this image of the person that we love dearly. We have this image of them, and we don't want to lose it. And we take that image of them to be the real person. There was a Zen master who said once, well, when we fall in love, we actually don't fall in love with people or things. We fall in love with an image in our mind. I think Thich Nhat Hanh said that. And when he was talking about the psychology of mind from the perspective of uh, consciousness only, school of Buddhism, which points out that love, hate, anxiety is born from this ignorance where we grasp onto the images of our mind as permanent objects, as totally independent selves out there somewhere. But let's reflect on that. When we're anxious and we're thinking about this person, we're even imagining what it's like to lose them and that we don't want to lose them. Is that image that's floating in our mind, or is that stream of thought, stream of images and sounds, is that the real person? Or is that just an impression of one moment in time, one moment of space that we had with that person? Maybe it was a very good memory, or maybe not. Maybe it was an unpleasant memory, but in a way we've frozen it in time and we've grasped onto it with our mind. This is what we call attachment. This is the manifestation of ignorance, grasping onto our thoughts as permanent, independent objects. So, what happens when we grasp onto these images, when we grasp onto our thoughts? What happens is that we end up thinking constantly. And it's not that thinking itself is bad. We, the Buddha didn't say thinking is bad and nobody should think. Because if that was the case, might as well just knock ourselves in the head with a club or just be unconscious. The Buddha also had thoughts. The Buddha also spoke. So it's not the problem of thinking, it's the problem of mistaking thought, grasping onto thought. And that leads to a constant, obsessive, unclear way of thinking, which then stimulates all kinds of emotions. So today we're talking about anxiety. But essentially, this process is the source of all forms of suffering, whether it's anxiety, whether it's doubt, anger, craving. It's all the same process. It's just that anxiety is when we're thinking about, or we have an object which is often, we see it as the future, not yet happening, and being unsure if it will happen, how it will happen, what's going to happen to this person. Will they leave me? Will they stay? Will they um, be what I want them to be? This process of attachment, or this process of ignorance, the Buddha spoke about it in the teachings of the 12 links. You heard of that? The 12 links of conditioned being, or conditioned arising. That's the technical term. The Chinese is 12因缘 or 缘起. It's the process of ignorance manifesting and then continuing. And we can extract the central links. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so links, which are the central process that we can experience in this very moment. We don't need to think about it, or just um, see it as a philosophy. We can reflect on our experience. And what is that experience? Well, it's when we contact the world, when we see, hear, feel, think. We do so in an ignorant way. We're not clear about what's happening. We're not clear that what's arising when we see someone, when we hear someone, when we contact anything, that very quickly this image in our mind is also arising. Image, sound, this internal form, this thought is arising, and we grasp onto it. There's also a feeling that arises in our body. It may be a pleasant feeling. It may be an unpleasant feeling. What happens if it's a pleasant feeling? Usually, if it's a pleasant feeling, we will we'll like it or we'll love it. If it's an unpleasant feeling, usually we'll resist it. We will dislike it. And this mechanism of grasping or of attaching, liking, disliking, then has this momentum, generates this momentum, which the Buddha referred to in some cases as karma or karmic force. This momentum of attachment to our thoughts and resisting the feelings that arise or seeking the feelings that arise just perpetuates and recycles again and again. And this is the linkage or the continuation of our anxiety. It's the cycling and recycling of our anxiety and all kinds of suffering. So the root of it we can see is this ignorance or lack of awareness, lack of clarity. So now that we know what anxiety is, so we know what the cause is, how do we deal with it? How do we actually deal with it? There may be a countless number of methods, but in terms of the Buddha's teaching, there is a certain principle that if we understand the principle, we'll be able to use the right approach with any method. And what is that principle? Well, the principle is that actually anxiety itself is impermanent. Anxiety, the experience of anxiety itself, is empty, so to speak, empty of empty of permanence, empty of self. Anxiety is not some kind of fixed problem inside of us that we need to get rid of or that we need to spend a certain amount of time to get rid of. If we recognize that anxiety is just a moment to moment attachment, it arises from a moment to moment attachment to the content of our mind, our thoughts. We can be free from it in the very next moment. This is the principle. The principle is that at every moment, we have the potential to be free from our anxiety and free from whatever suffering or trouble we're facing. Precisely because the anxiety, precisely because the suffering is empty, we can be free from it. And the Buddha spoke of this as Buddha nature. We all have the capacity to be free from suffering, even though we feel that we're um, completely immersed in it. In this moment, we have the capacity to be free from it. That's our Buddha nature, or that's our potential to be free, potential to be awake. So, emptiness or empty nature, the fact that everything is changing, the fact that our suffering is changing and not fixed, is directly related to Buddha nature, our capacity or our potential just to be free from it. And how can we free ourselves from it? Well, in terms of method or approach, the unique aspect or the unique approach of the Chan tradition is that in principle, in theory, as long as we let go of the clinging to our thoughts, clinging to our feeling of self that comes from this constant thinking, the moment we can let go of clinging to thought, in that very moment, we can be free. In the moment we can let go of clinging to our thoughts, in that moment, in this moment, we can experience freedom. Suddenly. Sounds nice, right? Does it mean that if we can do that, we'll just be free forever from all of our problems and, just like the Buddha? No, that's not what it means. Even if we were to experience a moment of freedom from this burden of attachment, freedom from this burden of clinging to our self, our idea of self, it doesn't mean we're forever free. But that is the basic principle. If we can do it every moment, then every moment we're free. If we can do it for one moment, then one moment we're free. So that's why so many masters in the Chan tradition would often just say something very simple like, drop it, 放下, just let it go. Let what go? Let clinging to the content of our mind, let clinging to thought go. Does it mean never think again? No, not at all. You could think freely. But it means we have the potential to see and drop our clinging and be free from anxiety. But the problem is, can we do it? If you could already do it, if I could already do it at this moment, we'd all be free and probably wouldn't need to come to these talks, probably wouldn't need to listen. And one problem is that because we still don't see clearly what's happening. We're not yet clearly aware of what's happening, what we're doing with our mind. So, because of that, we need some sort of concrete method. And often within the Buddhist tradition, sitting meditation is one method. However, it doesn't have to be sitting meditation. It could be walking. It could even be working. And from the Chan's tradition's perspective, sitting meditation is just one form, it's just one activity. The potential to cultivate our awareness of our mind, to become aware of our ignorance and clinging, to be able to eventually let go of that, we could do that in any situation, in theory. So that's why a very famous teacher in the Chan tradition, Master Huineng, the sixth ancestor in the lineage of Chan, he didn't push sitting meditation as the only way. He said, in theory, it's potential to develop this awareness in all situations in daily life. So he said, um, the stability of mind can be developed at any time, and he called it Yixing San Mei. Yixing meaning one singular approach to practice. There's one way to practice, which means in any situation, sitting, standing, walking, working, even talking, we can develop awareness of what's happening with our body and mind, and we can use it more skillfully. um, However, it doesn't mean that sitting meditation is not good. Sitting meditation is actually one of the easiest contexts to develop our mind, specifically because we're not busy or distracted by so many things. When we're meditating, we're just sitting still. We're temporarily disengaging with our senses, disengaging with the world to be more aware of our inner world, the workings of our mind. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the method now. I just talked about the principle, the capacity that we have to be free from anxiety. Now it can be useful to talk a little bit about method. I think I still have some time. Is that right? Okay.
We have plenty time. Go
Okay.
ahead, please. Thank you.
Okay. So again, when I'm talking about the method here, we could look at it as applying to sitting meditation, and it can actually apply to any situation. And with regards specifically to severe anxiety, I'd like to introduce that there are a couple of techniques which you can do when you experience an attack of anxiety. Some people experience anxiety attacks where they feel it's hard to breathe and their mind is racing. They may even be afraid that they're going to die because their heart is racing, they're breathing so heavy, they don't know what's happening. And there's a lot of fear there. That's a kind of completely emotional response triggered by this strong attachment to thoughts. For example, I work with one person who they have shared with me that they have a sudden thought of danger, like a sudden thought that their life is being threatened. Uh, let's say in a elevator. Sometimes when they go in an elevator and that door closes, they have the sudden thought that what if we get stuck? Or what if the elevator falls? Suddenly, after having that thought, their whole body and mind is struck with an attack of anxiety because they've been overcome by that thought. And the heavy breathing, the heart rate, the sweating, the racing mind, and it's a very painful, difficult situation to be in. One method or one thing that you can do to first diffuse that response is deep breathing. We first need to develop calmness before we can truly see clearly what's happening within our mind. We need a certain degree of calm. So, deep breathing in an anxiety attack, deep breathing can be very helpful. So, standing still or sitting and very, very big, kind of coarse breath, but taking it slow. You could even try it now with me, just breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. The whole body, the chest is moving. This deep breathing, if you do it a couple of times, 3 times, 4 times, a few times, that can often be just enough to take that panic attack from unbearable to bearable, to settle down the breathing, to settle down the heart rate, to settle the body and mind to where it's still happening, but it's bearable. With that deep breathing, you can also make sure you have good posture, because good posture allows the body to relax. Okay. If you can do that, you'll find that the anxiety attack will in time pass. You'll be able to be with it, bear with it. You know you're not going to die. You know you're fine. And the symptoms, the heart rate, the heavy breathing, the racing mind will gradually calm down. And it's interesting that these these three initial methods of deep breathing, good posture, and relaxation are also used in our Dharma Drum lineage of meditation. The very first thing we do when we sit down, like we did at the beginning with the guided meditation, is adjusting the posture, sitting in a way where we're not using unnecessary tension to hold our body. We're just putting our body there and letting the body sit. This in itself allows us to relax into ourselves. Just having good posture allows for a great deal of relaxation. Um, Usually, before this, we have an exercise where we do a deep breathing exercise. We didn't do that today, but that's also can be incorporated before you sit. doing a deep breathing exercise, regulating the breath, calming the breath. Posture can also be practiced in daily life. If we are more conscious of our posture, more aware of, for example, when you're working, if you do a lot of work at an office desk, typing, what's your posture like? If you start to develop good posture, you start to have a greater awareness of the condition of your body, and you're actually letting your body, relieving your body of a lot of pressure with good posture. So, standing, sitting, even lying down, posture, awareness of posture is a gateway, we can say, to awareness of our mind. And it's important that we look at our body and mind as a whole. Our body, our mind, it's a whole. They can't really be separated. So, awareness of posture, we're aware of our mind as well. So, sitting meditation, daily life, posture is that second one. First, deep breathing, regulating our breath. Second, posture in all situations. The next is relaxation. If we're aware of our posture, we'll be aware of where there's tension. And if we're habitually holding tension, maybe some of us just have this sort of shrugged shoulders. We don't even know it. We work like this, we stand like this, we talk like this, we walk like this. We're holding a lot of tension in ourselves. So if we can be aware of that, we can release it and relax it. Physical relaxation will bring a lot of comfort to us. It can release or relieve the pain of anxiety just by relaxing the muscles. It's very comfortable. Relaxing more deeply, if we can relax our attitude, that is key. Relaxing our attitude means that we're learning to become aware of how we cling, how we cling to our thoughts, how we cling to the objects of our anxiety. We first need to see that. So, for example, we may notice that we're very anxious about, and I'll use the example of losing the person in our life that we love. When, if we're aware of our body, relaxing our body, we'll start to notice that our mind is clinging to that image and we're resisting something. If we're thinking about them leaving, we're resisting that. If we're thinking about wanting them to stay with us forever, we're seeking that. We're looking for that. That kind of attitude of resisting, seeking, cycles and cycles. If we can see that process, we can relax that. We can drop it. Relax our body. We notice what's happening in our mind. We relax that resistance, or we relax that seeking attitude. What's interesting is that when we relax our attitude, we start to let go of those objects. We start to let go of those objects of thought because we see how much pain clinging brings to ourselves. So we become more and more comfortable with relaxing our grasping and having this very open mindset, open attitude. We're accepting of whatever happens. We're accepting and clear about what's happening now. We're not grasping onto an idea of, well, I accept they hate me, they're going to leave me, or they better stay forever, otherwise I'm going to do something. That's not acceptance, that's grasping. Acceptance is letting go of grasping, and we're just fully aware of what is here, what is now, present. This relaxation of attitude leads to a more deeper insight. What I just spoke of with relaxation, we could say corresponds to the aspect of calming the mind. When our mind is calmed, when our mind is relaxed, we have the capacity then for wisdom, for insight. Wisdom or insight into what? We have the capacity for insight into the very nature of how our mind is working. We have insight into the nature that our thoughts, those things that we clung to or cling to as real objects out there in the world, we have insight that our thoughts are just thoughts. They're images, sounds, content of our mind. They're changing constantly. Thoughts are flowing and changing constantly. It's so easy to actually observe the impermanence of our mind, of our thoughts. It's just not thinking about impermanence, it's observing the impermanent nature of thoughts, of the content of our mind. It's also observing the nature of feelings, which are often experienced, we could say, more bodily. Feelings, um, including emotions experienced in the body, the pain or the pleasant sensations and feelings in the body, we can observe them very clearly as changing. This is observing impermanence. And we're also observing how these thoughts are selfless. What does that mean? Well, thoughts don't just arise by themselves. That would be interesting. If a thought just arose for no reason by itself out of nowhere, that's interesting. Then I guess it would just stay there forever. We'd have a constant, almost like this stain in our mind of a thought just always there. And we know that's not true. Thoughts arise because we have different contacts with what we see, what we hear, what we feel. Some thoughts also arise because of previous thoughts. We were thinking about one thing, and that stimulated a thought about another thing. Thoughts are completely dependent on experiences of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and other thought. If we're able to clearly be aware of this process of the arising, the changing, and the passing away of thoughts, feelings, and all experiences of our body and mind, we'll truly be able to let go of clinging to them. Because why would we cling to something that's essentially impermanent? Does it make sense to cling to something that we actually can't keep? If we think about all our anxieties that way, all of the objects of our mind, and even like the objects of the physical world, physical things, there's nothing that we can actually truly keep. And when our mind is very calm, very clear, we can observe this process within ourselves, observe the impermanent, selfless quality of our body, our mind, and our environment. When we can do that, then we can truly let go. We can truly 放下. When we truly let go, that's that moment of freedom. Freedom from all anxiety. Freedom from not only anxiety, but all kinds of pain and suffering. So again, in the Chan tradition, what's unique is that we don't talk about stages. We don't talk about a fixed period of time. Like, how long does this take for me to go from being like really anxious to totally free? That's not something which is discussed within the Chan tradition. What's discussed is just the principle that it's possible. And as long as we can um, drop this attachment for one moment, then for that moment you're free. So the principle is more important than, let's say, the specific process according to the Chan tradition. So that's why it's called a sudden insight and a sudden moment of freedom, freedom from anxiety, freedom from suffering. And just to finish with a quote from the Heart Sutra, which many of you may know about, and which is quite important to the Chan and Zen tradition. There's a line that says, when there's no obstructions in the mind, there's no fear. When there are no obstructions, there's no fear. Um, 心无障碍就没有恐怖、恐惧。So with wisdom, with the ability to see how we use our mind, how our mind is working, we have the insight in how to relieve ourselves from this obstructive problem of attachment. When we relieve ourselves of this obstruction, we relieve ourselves of fear. And we can truly live in a more peaceful and in a more compassionate way. So I'd like to finish the talk here, try to be on time. I think that was just about an hour. Don't want to talk too much. But to summarize, we talked about what is anxiety, what are some symptoms of anxiety, what is the cause of anxiety, and then what is the principle, what is the underlying principle of how to free ourselves from anxiety. And then I talked about method. How do we actually do it? And of course, due to the limitation of today's talk, I didn't get to talk too much about method. If you want to learn more about method, well, then you can attend a retreat. A retreat is where we focus on method and focus on helping you to train yourself to use various methods to deal with anxiety and deal with all kinds of um, suffering, all kinds of problems. So let's finish here with the talk. And I think we have some time for Q&A. How will we do this? How do we take people's questions? Fasha, do you have a suggestion?
Uh, uh, I would suggest that whoever has the questions, please raise your hand. You can use either raise with your physical hand or with the hand icon from the reactions. Anyone? Or if you like sending your questions through chat, that's fine too.
Shall I look for their hands?
I'm looking at.
Okay.
Well, meanwhile, for the audience may need to take a minute or two to reflect what you just said in the talk and absorb it, and maybe give them some time
Sure.
to ask
Sure.
questions. Meanwhile, here I'm going to also do an announcement that David is going to lead a one-day retreat on April 18, which is Sunday. And the hours will be from 9 to 5. Okay? Just upon ending my announcement, Julianne, she has some questions. Yeah.
Hi, Julianne.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for this talk. It was very relevant, I'd say. And I remember in the beginning, you said when you were 20 something, you had like a constant anxiety about many different things.
Mm.
And for me, I'm 22 and just about to graduate. And myself and a lot of my friends, I think, well, this is more for my friends, like they have a lot of anxiety about job search. And like especially in this day and age, like with the I think there's even more competition than there might have been previously. So I was just wondering if you had any like advice like regarding anxiety, like specifically for a job search, just because I think a lot of them just feel that like competition and can't really get out of that mindset. So just wanted to see if you had any advice I could pass on to my friends regarding this.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I guess with job search, the big thing that brings about anxiety could be having to present ourselves. Maybe one thing is understanding what we want, not knowing what we want, but if it's about competition, then it's it's about presenting ourselves and even comparing ourselves to other people. Is that right? Like, wow, there's so many people out there, they're so talented, and I'm just a whatever, I'm not as good as them. There's a lot of self comparison. But if we reflect a little bit, is it useful to compare ourselves? Because everybody has something different to offer. Everybody has different skills, different abilities, and even different challenges. But every single person is totally unique. And we could say, in the light of impermanence and selflessness, what we talked about before, everybody's changing, everybody is influencing each other and growing. So why compare? It almost doesn't make sense to compare because we're so different. So, if we can become aware that self comparison just brings unnecessary anxiety and just drop it, just be, I'm myself, I'm unique. If the company wants me, great. If they don't want me, that's also great. I don't want to be at a place where I'm not wanted. And just have this view of uniqueness, cherishing cherishing your uniqueness and your constant growth. That much, just relieving ourselves of that much may make the process of job searching a little bit less anxiety provoking. It's not about competition, it's just about being yourself. I don't know, what do you think?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, from my perspective, I think all my friends, they're so like capable and they have so many unique aspects. I think if they can do their job search in like from that mind space, I think it'll be a lot, yeah, less anxiety inducing and a lot mm, like a more, I don't know if it would be fun, but at least it would be, yeah, they wouldn't put the job on such a pedestal, I'd say. So that was very helpful. Thank you.
Hmm, great. Glad it was helpful.
Okay, we have next one. Jeremy, please unmute.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for the talk. It's nice. I've heard about you. It's nice to visually see you this way and to hear your voice. Thank you so much.
Good to
I
see you
wanted to
too.
take advantage of your psychology study and background and expertise, specifically in terms of like, obviously, when we're talking about anxiety, talking about the attachments, talking about the, benefits of impermanence, the benefits of no self. From a psychology standpoint, I think about how probably all of us grew up, and you get a very strong sense of identity, from the very beginning from your parents, and a very strong sense of, like so many kids just think, I want this, I need this. There are so many strong attachments that get formed as we, come into this life. And I'm curious if you, like, from your spiritual practice and your psychology practice, I'm not a parent, but I'm just curious if you see ways in which like humans could, as we start to identify, do you see a way where we can do this without encouraging and feeding the ego, without strengthening a sense of self? Or do you think it is necessary that we go through this process of when we're young and go through life, we identify, we attach, only to when we get older, unattach? So I guess that's my question. Do you see a way in which we could, through human growth, do this successfully without attachment, or is it inevitable that we have to attach only to detach later? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, and just to clarify, I'm no expert in psychology. I see myself as a baby in this field. However, just the question of attachment in general. If a person is growing up, or for a parent to be raising a child, or for even teachers to be educating children, if I could just rephrase your question, is it necessary that a person has to go through a process of attachment first before eventually detaching? Is that right?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. This is very interesting, and I'll reference my own teacher's um, explanation of the process of practice to illustrate this point. Master Sheng would often say that we have to go from self before we can truly go to selflessness. We can't just jump to selflessness because we just have a strong attachment to ourself. you know, Even from a baby being born, can we say a baby has no self and then later on they develop a self? Well, from observation, likely not, because a baby also has these responses which show fear, which show unhappiness, which show restlessness. If a baby was truly selfless when it just came out, like some people say, oh, babies are pure, they're enlightened. If that was the case, if you just left the baby there, it would probably just be peaceful no matter what was happening. Wouldn't have any food, it wouldn't have any shelter, and it would just die peacefully. And that's not the case. As soon as we're born with attachment. So I would say that we can raise children, or we could develop a person, or help a person develop a healthier sense of self, healthier attachments, a healthier understanding of themselves first, and to stabilize that before they can eventually come to a point where they see that their sense of self itself is attachment, the attachment to their image of themselves. Once a person sees that, they can let go of it and still function normally. But let's say for a very young child to be able to do that, I don't know if that's possible, because children need to have a sense of stability, knowing that my parents are here, so and so is here, they're a stable person or thing in my life, right? And that I myself am also capable, I can help myself, you know. So children need to have a sense of stable attachment in order for them to grow up in a healthy way. In modern psychology, there are descriptions of different forms of attachment. There's an anxious attachment where the child is not really sure if they can rely on the parent, so they're sometimes comforted, sometimes afraid. That's one example. So we can develop we can help children develop a stable sense of self first, and on the basis of a stable, self-confident, um, clear sense of self, when that person grows and matures, they can transcend that. um, that's how I understand it. And in terms of the process of uh, development of the mind for adults, it's the same. Many adults don't even have a clear sense of who they are. They don't even know who they are. They don't even know what their mind is doing. We need to first stabilize that, so the sense of self is there. It's just becoming stable and clear first before that attachment to it can be dropped. So from self to selflessness, you know, stabilizing the self to letting go of the attachment to self. That's how I understand it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I, I think we'll conclude the talk today here. And thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Fasha. Thank you, everyone.
And yeah, thank you very much for a very comprehensive and thorough talk on anxiety, and it helped certainly shed light on the source, the root of anxiety, and which is the fundamental cause of our suffering. Start from uh, the sign, the symptoms that we feel or we appear, uh, and then slowly use the method work down uh, to eradicate uh, the roots of the problem. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.